Your new book is called Conservatism, a Rediscovery. And in it, you make the argument, and I find this so fascinating, by the way, you make the argument that American conservatism is not any longer, or perhaps never was, equitable to classical liberalism. Explain that to me and tell me what the difference is.
After World War II, there's a big confusion in the United States that sort of like gradually gets worse and worse between conservatism and liberalism. And liberalism is basically a philosophy of freedom. You know, I mean, all of us cherish freedom, but the principles of liberalism are about how, you know, giving people maximum rights in order to be, so other people aren't bothering them. And conservatism is it's a philosophy of how you maintain a nation over time. Whereas liberalism doesn't, I mean, when you take, you know, classical liberal, works of classical liberalism don't even ask, mostly they don't even ask the question, how do you maintain a nation over time? And so, the answer is, well, if everybody's perfectly free and everybody's perfectly equal, as some of the, great liberal theorists said, then, and the government's not allowed to do anything other than to defend those rights. So the question of how do you maintain, which is, I think, a very basic question. You like your society, what do you need to do to keep it? Or, as a lot of the younger people these days say a lot, you're conservative, but what have you conserved? Like, this book is about what would you have to do if you were going to conserve something. And there's a big tension between those things, because if you want to actually transmit something from one generation to the next, I mean, anything. I mean, whether it's God and Scripture, or an idea of marriage between man and woman, or even if what you're trying to transmit is a right, like the right to speak freely. All of these things, in order for them to go from one generation to the next, so that they continue, they require constraints. If you tell everybody just you're free, do whatever you want, then the whole thing runs down and falls apart. I mean, that's basically what we're seeing in the United States right now, is that everybody's liberal for a while, and then the Marxists try to take over, and then the liberalism collapses, and then you have this woke neo-Marxism, which is literally putting an end to the traditional order in the United States, and in Britain and in other countries. So the post-World War II conservatives, what came to be called as the conservative movement, is actually an alliance. It was an alliance between liberals and conservatives. They were fighting together against communism abroad and against socialism at home. But the liberals were people like Frank Meyer and Leo Strauss and Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand. All of those are people whose philosophies are ultimately, that's what I argue in the book, ultimately what they're trying to do is to get people to care about individual liberties. And then there's this other school of thinkers that are people like Russell Kirk and Robert Nisbet, and later Irving Kristol and George Will in the early days. And those thinkers are saying, look, individual liberties are great, but individual liberties, if you take it too far, it acts like a solvent. It basically will destroy every traditional institution. Like, you take the family. If the family is not based on a husband and wife working towards something that's bigger than themselves, and children honoring this bigger thing that's larger than themselves, but instead they learn to think, well, what's best for me at every given moment, then the family disintegrates, it deteriorates, parents get divorced, and then the children no longer have a family. And the same thing is true for a nation, that if all you have is freedom, and you say, well, our nation is just about freedom, and you don't worry about what do we need to do to preserve this. And in the book, I argue that the main kinds of things that you need to preserve it are religion and nationalism. In the United States, mostly Christianity and American patriotism. And if you don't consciously, purposely build these constraints that do limit individual liberties, but they limit them in a necessary way, then you'll lose your country.